Alright, this is a fix-it video.
Always eat the one you love.
So this video is a little special because I have two special cases for two different reasons. So let's start with Marshall.
Turn around! Spiral right over the deceased. Double 60-20 right over the deceased.
So officially Marshall's color is blue, but for me it's also white. A lot of the other gangs also have accent colors, but for Marshall it feels like white plays such an important role in their presentation that I just can't toss it aside. Blue for Marshall represents security. It also embodies all of Blue's negative aspects such as conservatism, predictability, impersonalness, and coldness. To me, it also represents order and uniformity, the ability to follow orders to the T with no questions asked, and it's mainly represented in Marshall soldiers. Which brings us to the color white. White for Marshall essentially reads the same as their blue, especially the coldness. White on Marshall represents cleanliness and perfection. Much like the Peacekeepers in the Hunger Games, white is meant to present a lie. The lie being that the soldiers donning the color are here to protect when in reality they're here to subjugate. In the Hunger Games, the subjugation was tied to making sure to beat down on the district's fighting spirit, as each district was a threat in their own ways. In the Saints Row reboot, the subjugation is tied to making money mainly through weapons manufacturing and basically racketeering throughout the city. So together, blue and white on Marshall means going back to Marshall soldiers, the higher up they are, the more white they are. Soldiers like the boss and the other grunts are decked out in mostly blue. The blue is like the most eye-popping part of their uniforms. On the soldiers, the blue is the presentation because these are the soldiers that most people on the streets will see. However, the more skilled and obedient soldiers get more decked out in white, or the white is the more eye-popping color, and it associates them more closely with higher-ups like Maiah Star and Atticus Marshall, obviously. Atticus Marshall wearing white and blue is obvious. It's his company, he's merely representing it. But his white overtakes the blue with his fancy outfit. It makes it clear that he's in charge. Maiah Star wears mostly white, indicating her high ranked, but she has shades of blue kind of scattered on her dress, not overtaken by the white like Atticus's outfit. It can be read as a way of saying that she's not completely under Atticus's thumb, that she has her own agenda, which we see play out in the mission severance package. Even Gwen plays into this. Despite giving off the vibe that she's been in Marshall for some time now, she's not higher ranked and she's still wearing a similar uniform to the regular soldiers. And that's because Gwen still has her own free will. She knows kissing up to Atticus is dumb, which is why she tries warning the player about how fickle Atticus is. She does it in her own way. That unfortunately makes her sound too much like a hater, so the player obviously disregards her. It's also probably why you don't defeat Gwen during any Marshall missions, but rather you defeat her during the LARPing missions, because Gwen is a person with an identity separate from Marshall and she intends to keep it that way. The boss's beef with Gwen is a personal one, almost like a rivalry. I also want to touch on the elements. Each of the reboot gangs were assigned an element, and it corresponds with their secondary color, which is why Marshall has white to represent air. One of the things I think is interesting is how each element has a corresponding natural disaster that you can assign to each reboot gang. With Marshall, their natural disaster are tornadoes. Tornadoes are a natural disaster that give off the vibe that they have a set path and that so long as you move out of the way or evacuate in time, you won't be made a victim of it. But that's not even close to the truth. Tornadoes can change their pathways anytime they want, and even if you evacuate in time, it won't stop you from losing everything. You can easily come back to a destroyed home, and in a place like the US where anything that can help people is treated like evil communism, that can be a death sentence for people, especially when homelessness is both criminalized and stigmatized. It's supposedly controlled chaos, but controlled chaos is still chaos. It's very similar to Marshall, who present themselves like the better version of cops. Anyone who is chased by Marshall probably deserves it, right? That's probably the mindset of most civilians in Santo Ileso. However, Marshall going after one target doesn't stop them from performing widespread destruction in the name of maintaining order. In their tactics, you can see that there is absolutely no regard for the civilian casualties. Like, some of their officers drop bombs when they die. That's getting put on the news. That's gotta be violating some sort of convention. Like, when you're taking pages out of the Legion's playbook, maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe you reevaluate some things about yourself. Marshall's battle strategy is similar to Masako and especially Stag. It's entirely shock and awe, which makes sense considering that these groups are always specifically meant to criticize the violence of the American government and its attachment to war profiteering. That's why these groups are also considered gangs. I remember when the reboot was first coming out and some folks hated that Marshall was considered a gang, but like, bestie, the only thing separating groups like Marshall, Masako, and Stag from being scrutinized in universe is that they make their actions legal. Benny's quote about the NCR applies here 100%.
The NCR is the biggest gang of thieves in the Mojave. Only difference is they pass laws to make their crimes legal before they commit them. Amber, reply?
Mr. Hall, how can I answer that? The topic is Haiti, and she's talking about some little party.
Hello, it was his 50th birthday.
Okay, so when I started this series, someone asked me to cover the Zin Empire, and I was like, sure, since I left them out of my video ranking the enemy gangs. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Hexley, if you were gonna cover the Zin, then why aren't they? Because I misremembered their color, okay? Adding on that Saints Row 4 wasn't really my favorite gameplay-wise. I only played it like twice a really long time ago. And I think when I did, two things either happened. One, I used a colorblind option. No, I'm not colorblind, I just like changing colors. Or two, I was seeing so much red plastered everywhere that I eventually started hallucinating a different color. Either way, I remembered them as being orange, but they are not orange. They're red. As I said in my red video, red unifies each of the red gangs through violence, and the Zin Empire is no different. The Carnales have classy violence, the Brotherhood have savage violence, the Morningstar have sexual violence, and then the Zin Empire have imperial violence. For the Zin, their red is dominance and violence, but also passion and confidence. The passion part might not make sense, but the fact that Zinyak is very keen on preserving humans who have made strong contributions to the arts like Jane Austen is proof of that. It still doesn't stop him from essentially being the same as most other invaders throughout history who often present themselves as the bastions of civility and advancement, while also presenting groups deemed their lesser as savages or barbarians. Being considered lesser by these groups to the point of genocide meant that a lot of culture and language is essentially wiped from history or demeaned because it's not proper by the standards of those that hate them. And we see this with Zinyak mainly. He's constantly trying to be this bastion of culture, knowledge, and civility to try and belittle the boss throughout the entire game. The boss is a filthy, violent savage, but Zinyak is distinguished. Even when he blows up Earth, he presents it as a look what you made me do type of thing. Like, how dare you rebel against your kidnapper? Which is how oppressors in real life act, or at least how they present forms of rebellion. Despite the violence many marginalized groups are subjected to, standing against said violence is presented as us being ungrateful or us biting the hand that civilized us. Even now, you have people whose stance on things like the French Revolution is basically, yeah, it's bad that they were starving, but they didn't have to be mean to the royals. I really wish I was making that up. Zinyak wants to portray the Saints, the boss specifically, as the ones in the wrong for fighting back. And like real-life oppressors, Zinyak is a clear hypocrite. Which brings another aspect of the Zin Empire's red. Anger. Just anger. Despite wanting to seem poised, especially in comparison to the boss, Zinyak always lashes out in the most violent way imaginable in that moment. And it's always in a way that makes Zinyak appear like a spoiled brat. He blows up the Earth because the boss escaped. Not Kinsey, not Keith David, the boss, aka the main trophy he wanted mounted on his wall. The moment that the boss rejects the simulation, it immediately turns violent with the NPCs trying to kill them. I want to stress, the boss does not immediately attack in this moment when things start going left, even though they've always been down to start busting heads the moment shooting breaks out. The NPCs literally only turn violent because the boss cursed, ruining Zinyak's game. When Zinyak kidnaps Kinsey, growing frustrated with how much she's accomplishing, he repeatedly bashes her head against the car before taking off. It's an action that would make sense if it was the boss or Johnny, but it's not them. It's Kinsey. He could have just taken her, but he takes the time to brutalize her for her transgressions. Even him putting her back in the 50s simulation is another example of insidious violence. I highly doubt that Zinyak believes in the sexism peddled by humans, but he still placed Kinsey in that simulation. Because placing a woman back into an era where spousal abuse is normalized, women can't have their own bank accounts, and marital rape is far from being criminalized is probably one of the most violent things you could do to her. Not to mention, he specifically has her married to the symbol of American state violence himself, Cyrus, aka a cop. The other simulations are no different. He puts the main cast through mental and physical turmoil. He forces Matt to fight Killbane. Shanti is constantly attacked by her insecurities and a zombie gat. He forced Johnny to go through waves of enemies only to always fail at saving Aisha. This supposed higher life form that's so much better than the human savages is doing the same levels of torture that humans do and lashing out like humans do. Worst of all, lashing out like a human child would do. And it's what makes the Zin's red feel distinct. Sure, you can make the argument that maybe Maero also behaves that way when he is upset, but it doesn't feel the same. Like, Maero feels like someone's ego was just bruised and he's lashing out to prove he's tough. Zinyak feels like a child that was just told they have to share their toys with their cousins, so they break it so no one can play with it. You get it? And then all of these tantrums are for nothing because the lowly humans, the main lowly human, still beats them. But that'll be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoy it. I intended to do green next initially, but then I realized I completely fucked up with the Zin and wanted to add them in. But I did want to make something too short just for a fix, so I chose one of the reboot gangs to attach it to. But until then, I've been Miss Hexley, and I'll see you soon.
Mix it up here.